It's time to talk Baltimore Ravens football on the Lads Football Network. And that means we will welcome in, Tony Lombardi. He's been talking Baltimore Ravens football with us from the Russell Street Report now for, Tony, how long now?
It's been a while. It's been a
It goes
while.
by
It's always
fast.
a pleasure for you, Greg.
Yes, likewise. I know you're doing your best to shove yourself off to a lot of other of the hardworking people at Russell Street Report because your site is even growing and you've got even bigger and better and more qualified people running your website and your business. But I always try to say, no, Tony, I want you, Tony. I know you got a good draft guy for me, and I'm going to be introduced to him real soon. Who's that?
Right.
I'm going to be talking to.
James Ogden.
I look forward to that. So we'll talk. I'll talk to
He's
James.
our James. Because, Jonathan Ogden, now we have James Ogden.
Okay.
And James
No
is British, but I'm telling you, he's a savant to the NFL draft.
Awesome. That's great. So I'm looking forward to that. But we get to talk Ravens football once more with you, and that's what I'm looking forward to now, especially because it's early in the process as far as free agency. We're not even there yet. We just got through the Super Bowl, but this is an exciting time as always. That's what's great about football. And for the Ravens, it's not just about the draft or just free agency. There's some coaching news, and of course, the big elephant in the room, Lamar Jackson. Let's start with the coaching move because there's a new offensive coordinator now. Just recently, Todd Monken came on board. What did you think about that decision?
Well, the Ravens, according to John Harbaugh, and it's been widely reported, threw out a wide net to come up with their next offensive coordinator, which is, as you said, Todd Monken. But here's the thing, that there were some challenges with that because the big elephant in the room, as you alluded to before, is the Lamar Jackson contract. So we don't even know with certainty if Lamar Jackson is going to play for the Baltimore Ravens in 2023. So to attract an offensive coordinator with uncertainty at that position, with uncertainty at wide receiver, there's some issues there. And if things were to unravel and not go according to plan in 2023 for the Ravens, there are some that believe that even John Harbaugh may be at risk. So when you couple that together with the uncertainties at offense, bringing on a top-notch coordinator was a challenge. And I know this about John Harbaugh. He's a good CEO and he's a good salesman. So I think he got a good guy in Monken. And I think that the reason why I like the pick is that he's sort of a chameleon. He can adapt an offense to the strengths of his players. He's also not afraid to use guys down on the depth chart to get them involved in the game plan if he thinks that they can help manipulate a weakness on the other side of the football. So when you consider those things, you look at his track record, you see what he did in Tampa from, I think it was 2016 to 2018. He took a team that was, I think, in the high 20s in terms of passing offense. By the time he left, they were the number one ranked passing offense. So if he has this adaptability and this chameleon-like aspect to him, I think what he'll do is he'll bring his passing concepts, his intel as to how to manipulate opponents in their secondary and through the passing game, utilize the talent, hopefully, of Lamar Jackson, and then combine that with the foundation that Greg Roman built with the running game. That's ideal for the Ravens. So if they can do that, if they can then get a healthy Rashad Bateman at wide receiver, draft a wide receiver, maybe trade for another one, I think the Ravens have all the makings of being a serious Super Bowl contender.
On Roman, because we've talked about him quite a bit almost every time we had this conversation at this time of year or before the season would begin. And there are some people out there that really feel he's done a great job because of look at the quarterbacks he's had. Not that, of course, Lamar Jackson isn't a special type of quarterback, but he's not a pocket passing quarterback. So you've had to kind of work through a specific kind of system. Same thing with Colin Kaepernick. So he's really done a great job. And then you have others that are like, well, is he the one that's holding back Lamar Jackson? Uh, no, understanding the talent definitely hasn't been there at receiver as well, but what do you think? What's being as far and closely associated with Roman since he's been there? What were your overall feelings on the job he did? Do you think that he could have been part of the winning and the developing of this offense, or do you think he was holding back the offense from becoming even better?
I'm going to say yes and no to holding back the offense. And let me start with his first year as the OC for the Ravens, which was 2019. Also, coincidentally, was the year that Lamar Jackson became only the second unanimous MVP in NFL history. So Roman had a lot to do with that. He orchestrated a unique offense based on Lamar Jackson's skill set, and it worked wonderfully. And not only was he a 1,000-yard rusher, he also led the league with 36 touchdown passes that season. And that's a lot of why he became the unanimous MVP. So great start. But in the NFL, they're always adapting, trying to figure out how to stop your weakness. If I want to use a basketball metaphor, if you're really strong going to your right, what do? You force the guy to his left.
Yes.
I think what teams started to do with the Ravens, and the Ravens didn't grow beyond that because the growth in the passing game wasn't there. You mentioned the lack of assets at wide receiver. I don't think it was a bad wide receiver group.
I agree.
When Marquise was there and Bateman was there, and it wasn't bad, but they were underutilized. And then it became, when All 22 came out, more fans were looking at All 22, and you look at some of the schematics of the passing game, and what were these guys, what was their function in any given play? We would see sometimes where three receivers, Greg, were within 10 yards of each other, only covered by two defenders. And that's not what that's not how you design plays. Now, I don't know if that is on the positional coaching, if it's on the scheme, or what is it, but no one seemed to come up with an answer. So the obvious answer was, okay, let's make a change here because we're not seeing the growth in Lamar as a passer. We have to come up with a better passing scheme, a better coordinator, and make a change there, because if they're going to invest that kind of money, that franchise money in that quarterback, we all know that when you age, you don't get faster.
That's right.
And injuries pile up, so that running aspect of his game isn't going to be as predominant as it has been for the first 5 years. So he's got to improve as a passer. And I think at some point in time, they realized that Greg Roman wasn't the guy to get him there.
Okay, so what does your gut tell you regarding whether Lamar Jackson will end up playing for the Ravens this season?
Well, the optimist in me says that they come up with a deal that's fair for both sides. And like anything in life, Greg, when you're sitting at the bargaining table and both sides walk away feeling like they did not win, that's probably a fair deal, right?
That's true.
If one side wins, then one side wins. Yep. But I think there's a couple of things at play here. And it all has been agitated by Deshaun Watson's contract in Cleveland. He gets $230 million in guaranteed money. All of it's guaranteed. So he's an outlier. Lamar looks at that and says, you know what? I'm better than him. I should get more, and I should get a guaranteed deal too. And Steve Bisciotti, the Ravens owner, he's of the mindset that was an outlier. We are not going to do that kind of deal. We're going to do a fair deal and a market value deal, but that's not going to be part of it. So, and then he's got probably all 30 owners, not named Jimmy Haslam from the Browns, saying to him, Steve, don't give him 100% guaranteed money. So you got those. Now, on the flip side, I've watched a podcast with Ryan Clark, who he had Damari Smith as his guest. And during that podcast, he just flat out said, we are trying to help Lamar become the bookend to Deshaun Watson. In other words, we're going to have another guy with 100% guarantee. Now, Lamar doesn't have an agent. So he doesn't have that guy, that buffer, to push back on the NFLPA and say, okay, we hear what you're saying. We're going to negotiate the best deal we can with this team for our client. But he doesn't have that. So he's being very influenced by the pressures of Damari Smith, who is an intelligent, well-spoken guy and can be probably intimidating. And I'm sure there's conversations going on like, hey, Lamar, you're doing the groundwork for the rest of your brotherhood in the NFL. And, we need to make this 100% guarantee. So it looks like right now, both sides, their heels are stuck in the sand. They're not budging. And, Greg, this has been going on for 18 months or so. I don't see it changing. So the tag is going to come into play. Question is whether Lamar will accept the trade to a team that doesn't give him that 100% guarantee, because I don't think it's going to happen, or does he play under the tag in 2023 and they do it all over again in 2024? To me, that's the worst case scenario. And the reason it's the worst case scenario is because the Ravens currently have $26.8 million in cap space.
Okay.
Lamar Jackson's exclusive rights franchise tag is $45.2 million.
Yeah.
So that means they've got to extend or renegotiate or restructure some other deals or let go of some players just to get him in under the cap. So that leaves the wide receiver room the same way.
Yes.
What are they there? And so therein lies the problem. The hope that I believe the team wants Lamar back. I think in the right situation, Lamar will be great. But, there's a lot of people, and we all have recency bias. Lamar hasn't played all that well the last 2 years. He hasn't been on the field in December and January the last 2 years. He's missed over 33% of the team's games in those 2 years. And for a guy who's a running quarterback and has been hurt, it's tough to give him a 100% guaranteed deal.
I completely understand, and I'm sure you do, both sides. Completely, 100%.
Yeah.
Understand both sides. And like you said, it would be best, I'm sure for everybody involved, that they come to some sort of an agreement, find out whether or not that happens. Because the other thing is, like you said, even if they do give him a 1-year kind of tag deal, it's still a kind of, all right, well, he's here for another year, but what happens after that? And when you build your team and your offense around Lamar Jackson, it is very difficult to build it around a completely different style of quarterback, which is why they've done a really good job with their backup situation and getting a guy that has kind of the similar qualities of Lamar Jackson. So I get that. But yeah, I obviously then you turn your attention to the long term. And what if you have to bring in a long-term pocket passer? Well, then all of that changes. And so I see that it's something that needs to either happen long term, or maybe it's time to bring someone else in. So I don't think 1 year is going to work for everybody. I agree with you.
It's a tough situation. I don't know how it's going to end. If you are asking me, I would bet on the way it's going to end. I think he's going to play under the tag, because if he's taking this long to find a deal with the Ravens and it hasn't worked out, how many other teams are willing to give a 100% guaranteed deal? Now, there is a wild card in this equation, and to me, that wild card, there's two of them actually. One of them was a better match, I think, for Lamar than the other. Atlanta and Carolina were both in on the Deshaun Watson sweepstakes, so they could be players. But I think that Atlanta is more likely than Carolina would be, only because they brought in Frank Reich, who is a more traditional kind of pocket passer guy. And they just brought in a quarterback's coach or an offensive coordinator that's the same way. The name escapes me right now. But I think that Atlanta's a better fit. They've got better picks. Could be a fit for the Ravens. They've got money. And because they were so in it to the end with Deshaun Watson, they might say, you know what? Waiting might have helped us because Lamar Jackson's a better player than Deshaun Watson.
And their offense, too, is perfectly built for Lamar Jackson, because we know they want to run the football. That's their goal. They want to run, and they want to run some more. And what better quarterback to have back there than Lamar Jackson if that's your style? So, yeah, I think it is a really good fit.
It's a tough situation, and it's, covering the Ravens, it's just this cloud hanging over us that it's like we can't even move.
I know.
Because nothing's getting done because this same old is happening.
That's why the 1 year thing is just, it's not good. It just brings back everybody. Okay, well, that's nice. Well, what happens after that? And then you have other things to consider.
Right. expect them to do in 2023? Will it be any different than it was in 2022?
Yep.
Will he still play it the same way, that if he's got a little bit of a knee problem, he's not going to go out on the field for 6 games?
True.
Is that what we're in for?
Yes.
And if that's the case, that's $45 million down the drain.
Well, that's still going to be a big topic. Maybe we'll get an opportunity to talk, hopefully, when it gets rectified in the next, and everybody hopes it's sooner or later, because it is like besides Aaron Rodgers, that's the other big story this offseason is what's going to happen to Lamar free agency wise. And also that's going to dictate a lot with the quarterback shuffling around the league. And same thing with Aaron Rodgers. So those two big stories, I think everybody would love to see that all put together as quick as possible, so that general managers and scouts and everybody can zero in on specific players and things of that nature. So as we go through the Ravens roster, and by the way, not a surprise, and I'm sure this is on everybody's mock draft. We did our first mock draft about a week or two ago, and I actually had Baltimore. We rotated picks. And so, big surprise, I went with wide receiver. What other positions of need do you think that if Lamar Jackson comes back, would the Ravens be looking at early, especially with that pick? Because on offense, I had wide receiver, which everybody has. On defense, I had corner.
Mm-hmm.
Would I be in that range there, corner?
I think wide receiver is one. And you can make the argument that cornerback is 1A.
Okay.
But that's the most pressing need in terms of depth. They drafted a couple of guys last year, Jalen Armour-Davis and Pepe Williams. And Pepe's this feisty little slot corner, and I think that he'll get better. Jalen Armour-Davis has all the measurables, but the guy just isn't on the field very much. He was hurt at Alabama. He's been hurt for the Ravens. So okay. I don't know that you can count on him. Kyle Fuller is a guy they signed last year who was, a veteran free agent. He got hurt first game against the Jets and blew out his ACL, and he was done for the year. I could see the Ravens making a play for a veteran corner, but this draft is said to be pretty steep in corners, so maybe they can get a decent second round player, at that position. So I think that that's a priority. I think that edge is a priority because we don't know for the time being what's going on with Justin Houston or Jason Pierre-Paul. We don't know what's going to happen with those guys. I think that JPP will be gone. I do believe that Houston will come back. He had a really good season last year, and he didn't look like he lost any gas. It looked like there's plenty left in the tank. So I would think that there will be a reunion there with Houston. But then you have to wonder, some of these guys might be looking at that quarterback position saying, I'm in the December of my career. I want to win a Super Bowl. Lamar gives me that best chance, but if he's not around and we've got a transition year coming up, I don't know that I want to be part of the transition year.
Just like we talked about, let's get this Lamar Jackson situation straightened out as soon as possible so everybody else can do their work. Yeah.
Right. So, and then I think, you've got a Jabo who looked good his last game against the Cincinnati Bengals, but, he's basically going to have his rookie season next year.
That was a red shirt, yeah.
Oweh has been a bit of a disappointment.
Okay.
He hustled all over the field. I think he showed some signs of life late in the season, so hopefully he can build on that. And Roquan Smith made the defense just so much better. Just it's interesting how you get a guy, you plug him in, and almost instantly everybody around him was better.
Yeah.
And so that was a great signing from the Ravens.
Tremendous.
They gave up a second, fifth to get him.
Worth it.
And it only made sense if they were going to give him an extension.
Yeah, great move. And it was when I heard it was Baltimore, I was like, of course, perfect. I mean, That's just tremendous move. As far as the cornerback situation, so Kyle Fuller, so he was injured last year, and he's a free agent, correct? Kyle Fuller?
He is.
So do you think he's going to be back? And what about Peters? Because they're both free agents. So what do you think happens between, again, the cap situation isn't very good. Do you think they're able to bring one of the two back, or do you think both guys might have to look elsewhere?
Well, I think they will look elsewhere, particularly Kyle Fuller coming off the ACL. It was unfortunate, but I think of those two, the more likely guy that sticks around will be Marcus Peters.
Okay.
They really like him. They he's a dog. He's one of those feisty
Yeah.
guys. He'll get up in Harbaugh's face, but they respect each other. But he's combative, and they kind of like that, alpha male kind of a role that he assumes. And he played a little soft last year. He probably wasn't 100% coming off that ACL.
Okay.
If the doctors think he can be 100% and be that ball hawk that he is, I think he could come back, but he's not going to come back at the pay level that he's been accustomed to. I'm thinking that it could be like a 2-year, $10 million deal that's a little backloaded kind of thing so that they can get him under the cap. But if he's looking for more than that, I know he likes it in Baltimore, but if he's looking for a lot more than that, I think he's going to go elsewhere.
How did some of the rookies look? Travis Jones, how did he look up front? Because I see Campbell and Urban and Pierce, and I say it's time maybe for them to replenish some guys up front. And they started that with Travis Jones last year.
Travis played well. Probably didn't fulfill the promise that the tone he sort of set during the preseason,
Yes.
which he'd seen beast. But, he came on towards the end of the year, probably hit that rookie wall, but still fought through it. I think he's going to be, I don't know if I would call him a force yet, but he's going to be a serviceable to above average player.
Okay.
And I think with, an upward trajectory. They've also got Broderick Washington, who had a really good season in 2022
Okay.
for sort of a run stopper, but, had a couple of sacks. And they have
Matabuike?
Justin Matabuike, who's a nice player. It's funny. He doesn't have consistency, because there are times when you'll see him on film and you'll go, wow, he's quick off the ball. He makes plays. He's got good hand technique. And then there are other times he just seems to disappear from games. So I think more consistency is key for him. He's still under contract, so he'll be back. Yeah. And I think they've got, some good pieces up there in the interior line, particularly as you see Travis Jones get better.
Yeah, I mean,
and Michael Pierce back.
And Campbell, I mean, he just keeps going too. It's just amazing. So, but again, sooner or later, those guys are going to have to be replaced, and we'll find. But right now, all 6 of the key guys are all under contract, and maybe Baltimore says, we'll worry about that next year because we have other important positions to worry about.
Right, and depending on how the draft falls, because it's always been the Ravens' philosophy that they're going to take the best player available. Right. If they hire their board as an interior defensive lineman, maybe Michael Pierce doesn't come back. Maybe they just let him go and they save a few cap dollars.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, what about on offense? It was you got Ben Powers, left guard. Was that his best season last year?
By far his best season. It's interesting how when you watch some of these offensive linemen for the Ravens over the years, I'll even go back to guys like Rick Wagner out of Wisconsin, and he was like okay early on in his career, but when he got the opportunity to play right tackle at full time, I only think he was with the Ravens 1 full year as a right tackle, did really well, and then signed a big deal with the Detroit Lions. And so then you saw it with Ryan Jensen. Picked him in the 6th round. He started to come on by the time he was ready to become a free agent, had a good season, signed a big deal with Tampa Bay. And so you've seen some of those things happen. I think Ben Powers is that next guy. But the Ravens do a good job of backfilling those guys. They've got Ben Cleveland waiting in the wings, and so he was a 3rd-round pick a couple of years ago. So he's served his apprenticeship, and now I think he's ready to make that leap. So I see Ben Powers getting paid by somebody else other than the Ravens.
And then Moses is back, as is Stanley, and the team used the 4th-round pick on the lineman, the big guy from Minnesota. Is it possible? Is it going to be another year before we see him maybe crack the lineup? Do you think he's ready to crack the lineup? What about the tackle position? You think it's just going to be Moses and Stanley again?
And Daniel Falele is the guy you're referring to. He is a monster. I will say this about him: the Ravens love his work ethic, his energy, his enthusiasm for the game and love of the game. So he's got all the intangibles to get better. He's willing to study film and improve his technique. And we saw them have to throw him into left tackle position for Ronnie Stanley a couple of games, and did a decent. Although he never played left tackle in his life. To do that, at the NFL level against some of these edge rushers that he was looking at. That was pretty remarkable. So I think they want to have one more year of apprenticeship with him. I think Morgan Moses, although he wasn't great, I think he played to his level of pay and had a serviceable year. Sometimes he had really good games. So in the Ravens running game, I like him. Not great, but certainly serviceable. And I think they'll keep him around one more year and let Falele get his his apprenticeship complete.
Okay, and then finally the skill positions. And again, not going to talk about the quarterback position until we find out what happens with Lamar, and that includes the draft. Because if Lamar winds up going somewhere else, you would. And let me, I guess, ask you that. So if Lamar does wind up leaving in some way, do you guess it's more than likely a situation that he leaves and then the team uses the draft to take a quarterback, or do you think they go out and try to bring someone in like a veteran in free agency?
It's a great question, and to answer it, it depends on what that trade of Lamar brings. And what I mean by that is if they get a lot of draft capital, and some of that draft capital is in 2024, I'm told that the quarterbacks coming out in 2024 are a lot better than the ones coming out in 2023.
Yes.
So maybe what they do is get that bridge quarterback, that gap guy, to help get them to 2024, take their lumps this year, maybe improve in other areas, have a serviceable quarterback. Maybe it's Tyler Huntley. I don't know. I know he didn't finish the season very strongly, even though he went to the Pro Bowl, which was interesting.
That was.
But, I think that, they could take their lumps for a year and still be competitive because the defense, I think, will keep them in games.
Yes.
The running game will keep them in games. They just have to be average throwing the football.
And speaking of the running game, so Dobbins, of course, as long as he's healthy, I look at this running back unit, though, and I say, Dobbins is obviously a good player, but I just feel like they could use another impact running back, especially how much they want to run. And it's nice that you can get a Drake to come in and play well every couple of games and so forth and so on. I think that's more of the system. It's just me. Do you think that they'll look at that? Do you think whether it's, I don't think early, but do you think maybe mid-round, which is always a nice time to look for running backs, and if you do your scouting, and we know the Ravens do a good job of it, maybe you can find an impact running back like in the middle rounds, or do you think that they're pretty happy with what they have, even though two players are free agents?
I think that they could make a play in the draft on day 3, maybe find that guy like they did in 2022 when they selected Tyler Batty. But they lost him. They had him on the practice squad. They lost him because Denver signed him to their 53. And I know that upset Eric DeCosta. He probably had that in the back of his mind. Gus Edwards represents over a $4 million cap savings if they let him go. And Tyler Batty, a 6th-round pick on a rookie contract, that looks pretty good on the cap, right? So particularly if he can play, and it looks like he showed signs that he could, particularly in a relief role. I think that J.K. Dobbins wants to be that bell cow. I think he's capable of doing it, particularly if he's healthy.
Yes.
But he does a lot of little things. I think he's got a big chip on his shoulder. When he got hurt in 2021, he lost that entire season. He looked so motivated, had worked so hard to get to where he was, blew out his knee. 2022 comes along, and you know how it is with the running backs. We've seen it with others that took a while to recover. And so 2023 is that recovery season. I'm looking for J.K. Dobbins to have a big season. I think he'll be the bell cow. But like you said, in this rushing attack and this offensive approach the Ravens have had, it's important to have more than one. I do think it's going to be somebody other than Gus Edwards, though, because unless Gus takes a pay cut, I think it'll be somebody than him. Because even with that decent salary for a running back, a reserve running back, there were times when he was a forgotten man.
Sure.
Greg Roman never called his number. I recall some games late in the season where maybe he had 3 carries for 2 yards and something like that. It was just, he just wasn't used in the right situations. And the Ravens struggled in the red zone when they should have been running the ball sometimes. I don't know what they were doing in the red zone towards the end of the year. It was terrible.
Well, do you think then that if they do look for a running back on day 3, that they look for sort of like a Gus Edwards replacement, sort of like a between the tackles, get me that 1 yard, get me that goal line kind of touchdown guy. Even though Dobbins, like you said, could end up being the bell cow, do you think they go more with the power back?
I think they're going to go with a back that fits their system best,
Okay.
and a north and south runner is that guy.
Okay.
And not a guy that cutback runner. They don't use a lot of zone blocking. They just, they're matchup blockers, and they just, there's a lot of pulling by tackles and guards. So I think that north and south guy that is a patient runner like Gus Edwards has been. I think they'd love to have Gus Edwards back, but not at the number he's going to be paid. So we'll see how that plays out. But yeah, I think whatever guy is available that they think matches up with their system the best is somebody that they'll go with.
And then finally, again, the biggest position need, wide receiver. And you look at the way Duvernay improved until he got hurt. Bateman was ready to come on until he gets hurt. But what happened was the injuries really just showed how much lack of depth the unit really had.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you think is the idea moving forward? It's okay, Bateman and Duvernay, we got two guys. Two enough? Do you think it's a matter of drafting, like you said, maybe first round possible receiver, and then maybe sign a guy, maybe a veteran that you can kind of count on? Or do you even think they go into the draft and take two guys?
Well, they could take two, but I think that you mentioned Bateman and Duvernay. Bateman's a given. He's going to come back at times last year, although he showed some poor hands in certain situations. The play that stands out, the one you see the most of Bateman, is that little slant he caught from Lamar Jackson against Miami and just took it to the house, just flew by everybody. And I think that people weren't sure about his speed, but I always say there's like practice speed and there's game speed. Showed game speed there. So I think a healthy Rashad Bateman could go a long way. And I think he's got the potential to be a number one receiver. I think he crosses, he's kind of fearless going over the middle. He can make contested catches. He plays the boundaries well, but he's just got to stay healthy. And he hasn't been able to do that his first 2 seasons in Baltimore. Duvernay is a guy over the last 2 years who really fades late.
Okay.
And he just, for whatever reason, I don't know if it's the way he plays the game, he runs out of gas. Even when he was in the return game last year, he was a Pro Bowl returner the year before. But even in the return game last year, he looked sluggish, a little slow. And now, because he made the All-Pro team and he was a Pro Bowler, first-team Pro Bowler, as a return guy, the way that rookie salary scale works, he gets a big bump in 2023. So now he's up over $4 million, and a guy that doesn't do a whole lot for $4 million against the cap. I think he's a guy that could either say to the Ravens, could say to him, look, we'll give you a 2-year deal to get your cap number down, or he could be a cap casualty. But to fill the room, I think a wide receiver that's drafted in the first round, if you get that guy, you get Rashad Bateman, and then they go and get a veteran. The veteran, the Ravens were in play for DeAndre Hopkins a couple of years ago before he was traded to the Cardinals. They were in discussions with the Texans. It didn't happen. They got more with the Cardinals, so that deal fell through. But he's said to be on the trade block with the Cardinals, so I can see the Ravens having some interest in him. Also, Todd Monken has worked with Mike Evans, who's thought to be a potential cap casualty in Tampa.
Okay.
So those guys could be – you get – if you have DeAndre Hopkins or Mike Evans coupled with Rashad Bateman and a first-round pick at wide receiver, that changes that room completely.
Yes.
And with the tight ends, the new offensive coordinator, if Lamar Jackson's back, with the way that defense played towards the back end of the season, you got a completely different look to this team and a completely different level of energy in the fan base.
Now, anything's possible with the cap, but can they, do you believe, sign Lamar and then also go out and get an impact receiver like Evans based on what his salary will be?
I do.
Okay.
Because if they do the exclusive tag, which eventually costs $45.2 million, versus a long-term deal, which probably is going to be half that in terms of the cap number in 2023. That frees up some numbers that they can go out and make those alterations to their wide receiver room. And the Ravens, I can see them doing it because I don't believe this is an organization that feels that they're in rebuild mode, even if Lamar is to leave. But certainly if he stays, they don't feel like they're in rebuild mode. They think that they're close to winning right now.
Yeah, I can see that. Unfortunately, it is the AFC. It's like when Sean Payton decided to sign with Denver, I'm like, is it really necessary for you to come to the AFC? Was that really necessary? Could the next great coach or player please just go to the NFC? Enough of this AFC stuff already. I mean, really. I mean, the AFC is just so loaded right now. It's just incredible. But you do see from year to year, it's just all about injuries and staying healthy and luck, and you never know what's going to happen from year to year with these teams. Before I let you go, you started off by talking about the rumors about Harbaugh. So are they legitimate, do you think? And do you think that's just a matter of, if they are legitimate, it's just, well, maybe he's been there long enough kind of deal? Even though, of course, it's because it's very rare to have Bill Belichick, that type of coach that stays for 20 years. That doesn't happen very often. That's not to say John won't stay in Baltimore for another 10. But do you think that would be the only reason? Because everybody knows how good of a coach he is.
He's a great CEO. He's a great motivator for players. He keeps the locker room together, even when things in 2021 went south with all those injuries. He kept that team together. They were in it until the end. And to me, that's a sign of a really good head coach. Now, the fact that he's only had two wins since the last Super Bowl, 2 playoff wins, I think that rubs people the wrong way, the fans base the wrong way. And the way their team has handled injuries, at least the public perception of the way they've handled injuries, has really worn thin on the fan base.
Okay.
So I think John, and even I talked to some of the beat writers that are covering the team on a daily basis. The consensus I get from them is that John has to have a couple of wins in 2023 in the playoffs in order to secure his position for another long-term deal. And I think right now he's got 3 years under his contract. Steve Bisciotti doesn't like to have lame duck head coaches. He does like continuity. They have a good relationship, he and Steve Bisciotti. So I don't think that they want to get rid of John. But if we're talking about the same kinds of things a year from now, Greg, one of the things we might be talking about is a new head coach for the Ravens.
Okay, so then what you're saying, though, to me, though, is that injury deal. That's the big thing. Because we know the guy can coach, and I understand completely, because I've been a fan of teams that have had, it drives you nuts. It's like, why are there so many injuries? Why is every year we have injuries? Why is this happening? The people at the front office, the head coach, whoever it is, make a change, do something different. So I get where they're possibly coming from, because it's the first time I've heard it, but I'm just guessing that's because again, the last couple of years. But then, like you said, it's amazing, because who would have thought that they'd be in position 2 years ago, and who would have thought they'd be in position with Huntley, a quarterback, to possibly win that final game to go to the playoffs. So it just shows you what a great coach he is. But is that it? Is there just some disconnects going on somewhere with the staff, the training staff, or I can't imagine it's a coaching issue.
I think it's the injuries. That's just a frustrating thing for fans. But let's be honest here. The organization, at the end of the day, doesn't care what the fans think and how they operate their organization. They don't really care what the fans think. So that's not really the rub on John. The rub on John is that the Ravens have struggled offensively for a number of years. And they've changed coordinators. They've changed quarterbacks. And at the end of the day, they still end up getting back to the same point where they can't move the ball in the air in the playoffs, and that's a source of frustration. Okay. So you begin to wonder, even though they've changed coordinators, even though they've changed players, it's the same result. Is it John Harbaugh's influence on that whole operation that creates this fall short offense in the playoffs? So if it happens again, all this continuity that Steve Bisciotti enjoys you have to make the argument, are we talking continuity or are we talking complacency? Is making the playoffs good enough? Do you want to be like Chuck Knox was back in the day with the Los Angeles Rams, where he made the playoffs all the time but never went anywhere? Even Andy Reid back in the day, the Philadelphia Eagles made the playoffs all the time but never went anywhere. And although he was better than Chuck Knox, but that said, you get my drift. Yes. Where has he taken the team as far as he can in the modern age? And I think he's got to do a little better in 2023 to convince everybody that he can earn that next long-term contract with the Ravens.
What do you think? What is your feeling on that? Do you agree with that?
If we see the same kind of offense, the same kind of offensive struggles in 2023 that we've witnessed over the last few years, he is the common denominator.
As long as Lamar's back.
And
would you give him a year if Lamar's traded and you have to bring in a rookie or a holdover guy? Would you give him an extra year? Or no? Whoever it is, I don't care. I don't want to see it anymore.
It depends on how the season goes. But, yeah, I don't expect this to be John's last season, 2023. I don't. But it could be. If certain things don't go their way, it could be. It could be that they are looking for a change. And, you know, I know a lot of fans locally will say, well, John never really hires a coordinator that would threaten his job. You know, he hired a 57-year-old offensive coordinator with really no NFL head coaching experience. So is he a threat for his job? Probably not. But, you know, but then the flip side of that is that if he's a good offensive coordinator, maybe that's his job for, you know, a long time, and maybe that's a good thing.
Yeah. It's one of those things where maybe I you know, you can always see it from the fans' perspective of the team that they have their coach, but when you look at like 20 other or 25 other teams in the NFL fan bases, they're probably going, please, yes, get rid of John Harbaugh. Please come here. You don't know what I've had to deal with for the last 10 years, 15 years. Not me personally. I'm happy with my organization, even though we've got a way to go, being the Jets. But I that just shows you, it's like there are just not a lot of proven head coaches out there like John Harbaugh. They're few and far between.
Yeah. And, you know, he's a good salesman, too. He's a good recruiter. When people walk in that building and talk to John, more times than not, free agents don't leave without a deal. And he's a big part of that. He's a good man. He's kind. He's got a big heart. He's tough. He's all the things you want in a head coach. But he's been stuck at this plateau for a while that frustrates people, and they want to get beyond that. And there's also a lot of people that will say that the Ravens have wasted a rookie contract of Lamar Jackson and not gone further. But and there could be that's probably not a bad argument to make. And the Ravens, to their discredit, have not given him the kind of tools that other quarterbacks have to be that kind of guy to take them beyond that divisional round in the playoffs.
And the fans, do they seem to side then more with sticking with the front office compared to Harbaugh? Do they blame Harbaugh more, or equally the front office?
It's interesting, Greg, and you've probably experienced this too, that I think social media has rolled out a platform for the vocal minority.
Yes.
And the noise from the vocal minority at times. So, you know, Steve Bisciotti's cheap, Eric DeCosta doesn't know what he's doing, and John Harbaugh, he's the common denominator, get rid of him.
Yeah.
You know, so all these, and it's like you just alluded to, be careful what you wish for, and see things through the eyes of other fans who don't have those kind of people in place.
Yep.
And once you do that, you know, I do like the stability of the organization. I think it attracts other players to want to come here. And, you know, and I think at the end of the day, it doesn't take much to get this right. I think they fixed that wide receiver room, get Lamar happy, work with this new offensive coordinator. It's important for Lamar to be there at the OTAs and training camp, because if he's that guy who's tagged and doesn't get a long-term deal and he sits out through all those things, that's an offense he's not learning. He's going to have to learn it on the fly during the season. and that's not an ideal
No,
situation.
that can't happen. No, there's got to be some sort of an understanding, but I'm sure you have faith, understanding how good this franchise has been overall and how they've run the franchise, that they'll figure out a way to make it work one way or another, whether Lamar's here or not. So
I have faith, but like society as a whole, Greg, you want it now.
yeah, I know. I
There's
know.
no patience in the world
I
anymore. They
know.
got to have it now. You can't let the all season play out. You have to fix it right now.
Yes. Well, at least we're here. And we have another month before free agency begins, or actually, month before free agency begins. The sooner we get to free agency and closer to the draft, the sooner we can get. Because I'm already going to start feeling the same way as a Jet fan. I already started hearing the Aaron Rodgers stuff, and I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear I'm not going to read the stories. I just want to know, is he coming or not? And if he comes, then I can have a little mini party. And if he doesn't, okay, move on. I'm used to it. I'm a Jet fan. Let's see what happens next.
Yeah.
But yeah, I know the feeling. I just, but again, luckily it's only another month or so. So it won't be too long before we figure this all out, including Raven fans who have probably been, like you said, been waiting over 18 months to get a final decision on whether this
What is your take on the job that Joe Douglas has done? Because he was from the Ravens, scouting tree.
That's right. It's been fantastic. And the thing is, as soon as he came on board, I was telling other Jet fans on my shows, because I know what was there before, and I know the difference between what's good or not. And I told him I'm 100% behind him, and whatever he ends up doing, I'm not going to disagree with it, and he's going to make good moves and bad moves. And when he makes bad moves, I'm going to be okay with it, because I know in the long run he's going to turn this franchise around. And that's what he's starting to do. And now he's got to figure out the quarterback room. And speaking of what you were saying with Twitter, that's exactly what I had to deal with for most of the season with Zach Wilson. The whole Zach Wilson thing that blew out a proportion with him and that press conference he had. And I was like one of the I was like I'm in the minority as far as Joe Douglas is not going to let Zach Wilson go anywhere. He's like giving up on him. People think, he's going to cut him. He's going to trade him like Sam Darnold. The kid's 23 years old. The kid has so much talent in him. I mean, Joe Douglas will not just ditch Zach Wilson just because the fans think he's no good. So, and I tell you the truth, I don't think he's going to go anywhere, even if they get Aaron Rodgers. I think that would be the best case scenario, is having Zach Wilson sit behind Aaron Rodgers for a couple of years. But like you said, as a Jet fan, I couldn't be more pleased with Joe Douglas, and I think they got the right head coach as well. So it's been a while.
Yeah, I like him. He looks like a good skipper to have on the sidelines. And as far as Zach Wilson, I've watched a few Jets games in 2022, and I got to tell you, he reminds me so much of Kyle Bowler.
Oh, really?
So much.
Why is that, though? What was Kyle Bowler's problem?
Kyle Bowler a little bit.
What was his problem, Kyle Bowler?
I think that the game was too fast for him, and he had this frenetic pace in his brain that he didn't let plays develop and hurried things. The guy had a cannon, was tough, was a good teammate, coachable. Just they couldn't slow him down, and it just, there'd be times when I heard Jonathan Ogden talking one time where they call a play which required a 5-step drop. So you take a different angle as a left tackle, and Kyle Bowler would be dropping back 11 steps and stuff. And so the sack goes on Ogden, and he's all ticked off because he gave up a sack thinking his quarterback was going to be further up in the pocket than he was.
It's those little things that the fans don't really know about what's going on. Yeah. I hear you. Yeah, I have no idea if Zach Wilson is going to be any good. All I know is that he was not given the proper coaching. He had an inexperienced offensive coordinator. Their passing quarterback coach died before the first training camp. Greg Knapp had all the experience in the world. He was going to be he was going to be the teacher for not LaFleur. It was going to be Knapp. They never replaced him.
Right.
And that was the worst decision that Sal even admitted it. He says, I should not have gone through the entire last season without bringing in someone. So that's why I feel like he needs a shot with someone like Hackett. He needs a chance with someone that knows how to coach quarterbacks. But who knows? it's not easy finding quarterbacks in the NFL. And
Well, you blew your opportunity with Joe Flacco. He was ready to take you guys to the Super Bowl.
yeah, right. Yeah, Joe, I think it might be over for Joe. I know he wants to play another year, though. So I don't think it's with the Jets, though. I doubt it. Tony, always
It
great.
won't be in Baltimore.
What's that?
It won't be in
No,
Baltimore.
it won't be in
either.
Baltimore. Well, what if they get rid of Lamar and they need like they go back to they go back? Was his relationship soured when he left?
No, I think just they've changed so much offensively that it'll be hard. Just
unless they went back
he's
to a different offense. Yeah.
right. He's a pocket passer that just has gotten tremendously slower,
Yeah.
and we used to call him towards his time in Baltimore check down Joe
Yes.
because he'd always seem to just
Get rid of the
throw
ball
it
as fast
to
as
the tight
possible.
end.
Yes. I know. I had to deal with it.
He was playing opposite.
Yeah. All right. Great talking to you again, Tony. And like I said, look, at some point in the next couple of months, if there's a big story, Lamar Jackson story, hopefully we'll get an opportunity to talk again. In the meantime, I'm looking forward to talking to Mr. Ogden about the draft sometime before the draft begins. And then because that'll be after free agency, before the draft, and get an opportunity to find out. And who knows, maybe the Ravens will have multiple draft picks if Lamar Jackson's traded or not. But
Right.
I look forward to talking to you guys again before the draft. I appreciate your time as always, Tony.
Sounds good, Greg. Thank you for having me.